What would Jesus do? It's a familiar phrase. You've probably seen it on plastic bracelets, t-shirts, bumper stickers. It's one of those ubiquitous aspects of our culture that is so hard to miss that I suspect I see it at least once a week plastered to the back of a car or on someone's baggy gym gear or, well, you know. What would Jesus do? This week, as I've been preparing for Christmas, I found myself thinking about the phrase, well, actually, that's not quite true. Instead of, I've not had those words, what would Jesus do, rattling around my head. Instead, I've been fixated on another phrase, what would we do to Jesus? What would we do to Jesus? Now, good Unitarian Universalist that I am, I tend to approach the Christmas holidays metaphorically. I do not believe that Jesus was uniquely the Son of God. I place myself in the company of generations of Unitarian Universalist theologians who argue that atonement theology, with its claim that Jesus' death on the cross was redemptive, justifies abuse, and has been connected to horrors including the Crusades, chattel slavery, and the Inquisition. And I have to take issue with the way that Jesus' name has been invoked to subjugate women, people of color, the LGBT community, and just about anyone who is not rich, white, and in power. And to be honest, I'm at best lukewarm about the historical Jesus. The oldest texts in the Christian New Testament, those by Paul, contain almost nothing about his life. The Gospels might contain accounts of the teachings of a Palestinian Jewish rabbi, or they could just as easily be an amalgamation of ancient Middle Eastern wisdom texts. Some traditions, after all, hold that Zoroaster was born to a virgin. The mother of Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, was also said to have been a virgin. And what is Jesus' death and resurrection but the story of the Egyptian god Osiris dressed up in different clothing? Many years, my Christmas homilies focus on the pluralistic nature of Unitarian Universalism or historic Unitarian connections to the holiday. Did you know that the Christmas tree was introduced to the United States by the Unitarian minister Charles Colin? Or that it came upon a midnight clear originated as an anti-war poem written by the Unitarian minister Edward Sears? Or that old St. Nicholas of Santa Claus fame gained his notoriety in part from the slap he gave our theological forebearer, the anti-Trinitarian Arius, at the Council of Nicaea. Some of my Protestant friends even jokingly refer to St. Nicholas as Slap a Unitarian Day. Sometimes I like to put the pagan origins back in the holiday, put the Saturn back in Saturnalia. But this year, what would we do to Jesus? All is not right in the world. There's war, or worse than war, the crime of collective punishment, massacres, indiscriminate bombing, summary executions in Palestine. Gaza, Israel, both are run by people that choose violence over peace. In Bethlehem, Christmas has been canceled. The town center lacks a tree. There are no bright lights. There is no caroling. One church's creche has the baby Jesus resting on a bed of rubble. Here in Texas, the season brings more of the politics of cruelty. The governor is celebrating Christmas. He's lifting up the birth of a poor, undocumented migrant. Yet, just this month, during Advent, he signed into law a bill criminalizing undocumented migrants and targeting people of color. He's fond of placing razor wire in the middle of the Rio Grande. Rather than provide refuge for refugees, he would see them drowned. What would we do to Jesus? Would Governor Abbott deport him, jail him, pray that he sinks into the murk of the river? Would President Biden send bombs to be dropped on his house? Now, I recognize that some of you are probably thinking that this is a political homily and that politics are out of place during this festive time. There's plenty of advice columns and social media posts, after all, about how to avoid unpleasant conversations at the holidays. And here we are at church. Bringing up politics at the dinner table is supposed to be rude. One columnist claimed that starting a political conversation during the holiday meal is like holding up a sign that says, "I'm stupid." Others have suggested about what to do if someone violates the rule of no politics over the Christmas dinner. Ignore them. Bring a bell with you and start ringing it. Ask for the salt. If everything else fails, spill the soup. Better to have to clean up a messy table than to clean up the mess from a conversation gone astray. It's good advice. I enjoy a good dinner, music, wine, a nice salad, maybe some pasta with mushrooms, homemade cookies, and, well, to finish it off, a glass of scotch. I don't want an evening argument. But here's the problem. Who was Jesus? Now, I don't mean the historical Jesus. So little is known about him that Albert Schweitzer could write confidently, the Jesus of Nazareth, who preached the ethic of the kingdom of God on earth and died to give his work its final consecration, never had any existence. When I ask the question, who was Jesus, I'm thinking of the Jesus found in the stories in the Christian New Testament, the Quran, and some of the Gnostic Gospels. The Jesus whose birth narrative forms the core of the Christmas holiday. That Jesus, the mythical Jesus of Christmas, did not have rich parents. He did not live someplace like River Oaks. His father did not drive a Tesla or whatever was the equivalent of a Tesla 2,000 years ago. His mother didn't drive a Porsche, what passed for a Porsche in Galilee. His parents were not citizens or part of the ruling elite. The food he ate was mostly simple fare, no single malt scotch for him, I'm afraid. The Jesus of the Christian New Testament was different. He was a poor Palestinian Jew. He was not a Roman citizen. His parents were poor. His parents were undocumented. They lived in fear of state violence. His parents were refugees. The ancient texts claim that the three wise men were afraid of Herod's soldiers. The texts claim that Herod called for the murder of children. Jesus' life was filled with violence, poverty, and insecurity. What would Jesus do, people like to ask? It's not really a good question for Christmas. Or more accurately, it's not a good question for people with comfortable lives. Jesus' life was anything but comfortable. His life was hard. It's almost impossible to understand his ethics or his theology or his religious teaching if your life does not contain some kind of hardships. His teachings were tilted to the poor and oppressed, not the rich and well-dressed. A lot of us, I suspect, would be better served during the season if we asked not what would Jesus do, but what would we do to Jesus? What will we do to Jesus? The Christmas story is the story of a homeless family. And how do we treat the homeless? This year there are more homeless people in the United States than in any of our lifetimes. Yet we build houses for the rich rather than for the poor. Most young people don't make enough money to buy their own homes. And 12 years after he ran for president, Jimmy McMillan is still right. The rent is too darn high. The Christmas story is the story of a refugee family. And how do we treat refugees? Our governor likes to ship them to other states. Texas does not take in the poor or the starving, the huddled or the terrified. The politics of cruelty demand that they are kept out of the Lone Star State. The Christmas story is the story of a family afraid of state violence, afraid of Herod's soldiers, afraid of the Roman Empire, afraid of the spear, the shield, and the sword, who lives in fear of state violence today. More than 1,000 people were killed by the police this last year, a disproportionate number of them people of color. Were Jesus, Joseph, and Mary white? The state and the country's political classes have done nothing meaningful to stop gun violence. Did Mary, Joseph, and Jesus live in fear of violence? What would we do to Jesus? Christmas is an opportunity to think about how the most vulnerable live in a world of empires, rich men, and soldiers. It's a chance to ask the questions, where am I in stories like Jesus's? Am I like the innkeeper who would not give the family shelter? Am I like one of Herod's soldiers? Am I like Herod? Most of us, I suspect, want to see ourselves in Jesus' family or the shepherds or the wise men. But if you're like me and you're going to leave here for a nice dinner, brilliant wine, good mushrooms, pasta, and that glass of scotch to wash it down, then the truth is that your life is probably more like the other people in the story. Now, I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. On the contrary, I'm just thinking of the words of Oscar Romero, the great liberation theologian. He said, "There are many things that can only be seen through eyes that have cried." And I'm thinking of our own Rebecca Parker's claim, "There is no holiness to be ascertained apart from the holiness that can be glimpsed in one another's eyes." The Christmas story offers an invitation to see through eyes that have cried. Mary's eyes, the eyes of a poor, pregnant, homeless woman. Joseph's eyes, the eyes of a refugee afraid of the government's violence. To see through their eyes is to understand Christina Perry Rosie's challenging words. It would be better not to be born. But in case one is born, it would be better not to be exiled. The Christmas story is more than just an invitation. It's a birth story, and it is a reminder that all births are stories of hope. They are beginnings of new stories. The Christmas story is an invitation to see through eyes that have cried and hope for a better world. Each new life, humble or high, contains a world of possibility. There's a chance that this year in Bethlehem, where Christmas is canceled, a Palestinian boy will be born who years from now will make peace, not war, with a Jewish girl born this year in the West Bank. There's also the possibility, the outside chance, that you will discover a new beginning too. The Christmas story is that there are miracles to be found in unexpected places. No one expected a miracle in a manger. No one expects a miracle today to be found under a pile of rubble. But perhaps one resides there. Sometimes miracles are like the shepherd's blinding star. Other times they're smaller, the vanishing visions found in the poet's cloud. It's like Mahmoud Darwish wrote, "For each sense there is an image, and for each time there is a cloud." What would Jesus do? What would we do to Jesus? This Christmas, when there are massacres in Gaza, in Sudan, in Ukraine, while October's dead are mourned, while I pray for a ceasefire and better governments for Gaza, Israel, and Texas, it is probably better to ask, where can we look for miracles? Where can we make miracles? In the houses of the rich and powerful, or in the streets with the poor? In the eyes of Herod's soldiers, or in the eyes of those that have cried? These are the season's questions. The Christmas story is the story of a baby in the manger, a baby without a home. And when we ask questions about that story, we open the way for miracles. So, in the hopes that we will ask good questions, and in doing so encounter miracles, I invite the congregation to say Amen. Merry Christmas, much love to you.